mate. You all right?
Yes, not so bad. Trials, tribulations, these things are sent to try us and all that other kind of religious bollocks.
Yes, and try as they do. Yes,
Mm,
quite regularly.
yes,
Yes,
absolutely. So
but
yes, all good fun, all good fun. But
this
in the
has been such a
highlights of
different
everything,
one.
eh?
This has been such a different one, hasn't it?
Yes, because this
Like
is
now watching a film.
film. We've gone for film.
Yeah.
Yes, this time. I'm regret. About 2 days after I suggested it, I regretted suggesting it, and I'll explain. I'll explain why. Oh, should I
What?
do it now? Hang on, or will that be like the Schrodinger's cat observation? No, I'll explain afterwards why I feared this.
Right.
So you asked the question.
The question is, what have we been enjoying this week?
We have been enjoying The Changeling, 1979, as the copyright says, though I think it didn't get released until 1980. Peter Madok film starring George C. Scott. The basic story, and please forgive me, I'm still brain fogged and I can't remember the character names. George C. Scott, we'll call him George. So he loses. Oh, hang on. Actually, before we do this, this is going to be the most spoiler-laden thing you've ever heard. If you have not watched The Changeling yet, I'm going to put a little break in now, and then you're going to be able to go off and watch it in the little 30 seconds of gap I'm going to leave. Go off and watch The Changeling before watching this, so that if you've never seen it and you don't know the story, it is best to have it fresh and blank so that you can get all the nice surprises. Then come back and listen to what we've got to say about it. Okay, so we're going to have a break now. And come back to say, all right, so George C. Scott loses his wife and his daughter in a tragic accident on a snowy road. Filled with grief, he then spends so much time. You don't see this. Time passes as you see him leaving his New York apartment where he lived with his family, which is the Dakota building, actually. I think it's even the same flat that was used in Rosemary's Baby. But we'll come back to that in a bit. Anyway, so he moves to Seattle in order to take up a lecturer's role because he is a prominent composer and alumni of the university in Seattle. Whilst in Seattle, he then rents an old property so that because he doesn't want to be near anyone and he wants to start composing again. Once in the property, weird things start to happen. Spookiness starts to rise, and it starts on a low level and starts building up and building up and building up until we learn that the ghostly accounts are not his daughter, though linked in terms of the grief, but actually from a small child. And there's a couple of red herrings that go in there, and then there's a small child who was drowned by his father and had a replacement put in place from an orphanage because this crippled child was worth a fortune, but if he died before the age of 21, the father would not inherit any of the money. So he basically did a changeling and changed it over in that point, at which point he then goes into the investigation. George C. Scott finds all the evidence that's required in order to present to the changeling, who actually is the senator for Seattle. So there's these big connotations and all that sort of stuff. Bit of a confrontation goes on, some very, very scary scenes, particularly one involving a seance, another one involving a rubber ball and some stairs. And then we get to the point where the acceptance is had and the senator dies and the ghost is maybe at peace. How's that? Was that the film you watched?
That was a damn sight better than the film that I watched.
Oh, no, this is we're getting dangerous. What did you think?
If I hadn't been watching it for this, in that case, 20 minutes in, and it would have been a case of, let's see if Naked Attraction's on the other side.
Yeah, you see, this is why I was fearful.
Yeah.
My thing here is you have just watched my number one film of all time.
Yeah.
Right? And I will explain why so over and over and over again in this film, because I think it's not a perfect movie. The Sixth Sense is almost a perfect movie. But I think that, but this film, there's something about this film. I don't know if it's because it's a bit of a forgotten classic. I don't know if it's what it is about it. It's got some really silly bits in it, but it has always consistently been absolutely top of my film list. And every time I go back to it just gets better and better.
I can fully understand why as well, because looking at it, it's a prototype. It's not stereotypes. It's a prototype. So that ball bouncing down the stairs is really, really fucking creepy and works so well just because it's something that we've all experienced, we've all seen. And the fact that that's the same ball. And when the ball comes back after he's thrown it away in the water, that's just a really disconcerting moment. As we've said before, anybody else would just be, right, fuck this, I'm out of here. And you would fully understand why they do that.
Yeah, but the tie for him, but that is where I think it's genius, is because of his grief, it makes him curious. And that's where it starts to that's what keeps him in the house beyond the point where he should be there.
I thought that part was really, really effective. I thought the wheelchair chasing her so that she falls down the stairs was almost comic, but at the same time, very, very chilling.
And the reason why I have a phobia of empty wheelchairs.
Get that. Completely get that. I thought that was incredibly spooky. I thought a lot of the things in it were just so effective. But the thing as a whole, and this is me as an audience that's wrong here, it's nothing that's wrong with the film. The thing as a whole, just in the first 5 minutes, he loses his wife and his daughter.
Yes.
And then they are irrelevant throughout it. And I get what you're saying. They're not really irrelevant. His grief is keeping him there. And there's sort of like they are there almost to present the red herring that keeps him with his interest invested in the supernatural throughout to the end. But to me, I just didn't quite get that connection. And to me, being a simple fucker, I like to sit through Friday the 13th Part 2, where Jason Voorhees is unhappy. He kills some people. They die. They try and kill him. They don't do a very good job of it. Then we move on to the third movie. Yeah.
This is where I think you get the idea of literature and movies straddling at this point, because I think the structure of this story is very, very much the structure of a well put together story. If you read the story as being a man has already lost, because you wouldn't have the actual image of them dying in the story, you would learn that as part of the character development.
Yeah,
he's sad and he goes to live in this house. And I love, for me, the pacing is beautiful all the way through because it ramps up. And the interesting thing with the ball is when the ball bounces down the stairs, that's the Volta. That's the midpoint. You know, if you take Sid Field's 3-act scenario, that is the midpoint of Act 2, because that's the point when it stops being ramped up kind of little bits of spooky. And he's already uncovered the death of another child that was associated with that house. And that's where it turns it on its head, because that's the moment it says, go and get this medium, go and have the seance. And you have that sequence of events, starting with that ball that ends with the woman being terrified at the bottom of the stairs because the wheelchair's just there. That was just like, it's just amazing. And then from that point on, it becomes a mystery that turns around. So it really does flip. And if you read that as a story, I think you'd go, wow, you know, because it just draws you in. But I get what you're saying. In films, which are usually a little bit more popcorny and a little bit more kind of much more gratifying in the early parts of it, you know, like you say, Jason Voorhees, you know, he's not happy because he wasn't in the first film very much, you know, goes around to finish his mother's work. You know, and then you move on till you get to Jason Does Manhattan, which he doesn't, but which he doesn't do very well. But
there's Jason X.
I love Jason X. I love Jason X. Yeah.
Which I thought that was superior to Malcolm X. Now
much superior to Malcolm X. Yeah. Completely, chalk and cheese, really. I'm allowed to say that about Malcolm X.
But also, Jason X and Malcolm X sums up me as a popcorn muncher.
Yes.
I'm just sort of like sat there and I'm wanting easy entertainment. I don't want things that are going to challenge me. Darwin.
But I want to get into you as a horror writer. I want to get into you as someone who likes to scare the shit out of people. And I'm not talking about jump scares, right? Which is what, let's face it, your Friday the 13th, your Freddy with his, knives, the wonderful pedophilic child-killing knives that we then put on 5-year-olds on Halloween. They're your jump scares. They're your proper. This I think, because I mean, the where you really start getting it is that moment with the piano key that doesn't work and then works. And then I love the bit when he's writing the music. He's just sitting there playing with music, and the door just opens behind him, and he starts playing the music box music, which you don't find out that's what it is until later. Those are just so beautifully realized moments of creepy, unnerving uncanniness that then gets up towards the weird. I think it's just such a well-constructed horror story.
Yeah,
along the lines of everything we've read.
I think those parts were done very, very effectively. Almost as effectively as you see it being done on episodes of Inside Number 9.
Yes.
Where they're doing the supernatural stuff and they cut from one scene back to another, and only a more astute viewer is going to see that there's a shadow figure lurking in there. And it's part of me wonders who that's actually made for. Because if it's sort of like popcorn munchers like I who are sat there, you don't notice that. You just think, oh, camera's going a little bit wibbly wobbly.
Yeah.
Whereas, somebody who's looking out for all these details sees these things and is terrified by them.
Yes.
Which, I like the fact that there are layers within these things. And I like the fact that we're able to watch this and parts of it worked for me, but the whole didn't work for me.
Yeah.
I
think, though, if I presented that story as a short story to you from someone else, one of the older short stories, because it has a real kind of classic ghost story feel about it, which is why we ended up watching it, because of that W. Jacobs story, the Toll House that we read, and this has all those beautiful elements and some more put on top. The twist into who the ghost actually is. It's just the most wonderful thing to sort of like throw in the middle of a ghost story. And I say is, if you read it, I think you would have a different view from watching it. So I think you as a consumer, you're right, you as a consumer have almost like this dual personality. As a consumer of film, you're almost expecting it to not be as enriching, because probably like me, a lot of the enriching movies that we've ever watched in our lives have been shite. They've been kind of like versions of Shakespeare that someone's done in black and white and done all the dialogue in reverse because it's arty. That's what you kind of get out of normally an enriching movie. But this is more along those. It's like The Exorcist. As I say, they used to advertise it as first there's The Exorcist, then there's The Omen, and then there's The Changeling. It just never took off. Because I think in 1979, you had Friday the 13th, Part 1. Well, it wasn't called Part 1 back then. George Lucas hadn't got round to renaming them.
If George Lucas had named them, it would have been Part 4 that started it.
He would have started with Jason Takes Manhattan and then gone backwards.
Yeah.
So it was released at a time when actually the genre had been moving towards slasher movies. We'd had Halloween in 1978. We got Friday the 13th in 1979. So even the Omen movies had gone into a little bit more of a gore sort of fest. When you look at kind of Damien, Omen 2, and you go into the final conflict, they had more gore-orientated visions within them, and there were less haunted house than the first one, than the Omen is, And
that was one of the good things about this. There was so little gore in it. I mean, aside from sort of like drowning a naked boy in a bath.
It's horrific. Yeah.
Aside from that, and yes, some people who weren't very good at driving at the start.
Yeah, there's the driving stuff. There's a really weird bit when he first sees his first vision of the child in the bath, where for some unknown reason he walks very slowly backwards towards the camera. But he comes out of the bathroom, he sort of sees it and goes, "Oh, right, hang on, I see there's a right boy in this bath," and then it cuts to the hallway outside, and you see him from the back in silhouette, and he just walks. It's a very it's not been done in order to further the plot. It's been done purely for art reasons of this silhouette moving towards the camera very, very slowly. And you're thinking, he's just walking backwards down the corridor. You know.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Hitchcock, for that. Yes. The ball bouncing down, loved that part. This seance was actually kind of a lot of fun. That was, and again, I suppose it's because with the seance part, the spookiness was coming from a little old lady, and we don't expect little old ladies to be that spooky.
And this is where, again, I'm going to back up what you were saying here about prototype, in that was a small woman. And the first thing she does is walk through the house until she finds the room and then comes back again, which is also what happens in Poltergeist, which is 5 years later. You know, there's so many moments, I think, through this film that you can see that after this film came out, the horror makers, and I'm including the guys that did Inside Number 9 here, I bet if you mention the Changeling to them, they will be all over it, you know, and, you know, putting that fear of God into them, that they've been using the camera angles, the story elements, you know, the way the sales. It was the first time I'd ever seen spirit writing when I first watched this movie. I'd never seen anyone do that before in that way. We just had the scribbling and then he's just reading it out. And you should be able to detect from that. That's where I got it from when I did the Halloween special last year down at the House of Secrets.
Now that you've put two and two together for me, yes.
Yeah, that's where it came from.
And I suppose this is all, I mean, to take it back to a literary trope, this is all defamiliarization, isn't it? So the unusual angles where somebody's walking backwards towards the camera, this isn't something that we ordinarily see. And therefore, it's potentially being done just to give us a reinforcement of the uncanny as we're looking at that.
There's a lot of shots, if you notice, there's a lot of stuff inside the house where the camera pans upwards, it cranes. And so you're watching it, and then all of a sudden you'll see the lights just come into view. So you're constantly watching it above the action, almost like a spirit, almost like The Haunting of Toby Jug, which, you know, the Dennis Weekly novel, when he kind of, I know it ends up being a spider, but the whole thing's described from a completely odd angle to what you'd expect it to be done. So you get this idea of it floating up. And that worked. As I say, it's not the film, it's me. It's me being I'm embracing the fact, I'm embracing my inner popcorn muncher. Last week I sat and watched the new Puss in Boots film. You loved it.
And loved it. It was just it was wonderful entertainment that ticked all the boxes and had me laughing in a wonderfully formulaic way. I think I do like a good formula.
And there's nothing wrong with that, I think. There's nothing wrong with a good formula. There's nothing wrong with being sort of like a balls-out entertainment. It can go wrong. I think Marvel have gone down the road of it going wrong. I don't think they're as entertaining anymore. They've almost gone... It's almost like Clip It turning up and saying, "Oh, I see you're writing a Marvel movie. Would you like me to help?" And, you know, you can see it, but you have these great films, I suppose, that do this. Like Alien is a great haunted house movie when you really think about it, in certain elements, as a beast, but, you know, as a monster sort of chasing you around. And that does what this does in that creepiness. It creates that unworldliness in such a way that it builds up and creeps up on you. So I get what you mean, because at the beginning of it, you have that long it's not even that long an intro, but I get what you mean, because he does the going to the university, he does the going to the concert, and there's huge amounts of foregrounding going on in all of these scenes, and you meet the weird people, and that sort of thing for when it gets going. But I get it's just not like films nowadays. You don't get films that take that kind of time in that way anymore. You either have the whole film is just about character development, but you very rarely get a film that kind of moves at that kind of pace and then ramps the pace up towards the end, the way this one does. Starts off slow and then really picks up pace, and catches you out in the way that it picks up pace. You're not expecting. I think the first time you watch this film, it's very, very difficult to predict what's going on.
Yeah,
because it doesn't formulate. It just doesn't sit in those pockets in that way.
And I suppose it's because of things like Friday the 13th and all of the slasher films coming out, that this looks like it's the last remnant of a classier breed of horror film.
Yeah, maybe.
Because,
it's just at the cusp, isn't it, where the slasher takes over for a bit.
Yeah, because I think, No, go on.
Yeah, no. So I think trying to mix slasher and this kind of movie together is where we're getting things like The Conjuring. They're trying to go back to that kind of creepy thing, but at the same time still throw in a huge amount of Hollywood, pizzazz on top of things. So
yeah. And I mean, these things are always evolving anyway. So it'll be The Conjuring, and then we'll move on to something else that's got something similar in it. But also, it was almost like an Agatha Christie version of a slasher film, wasn't it? With the fact that we've got, there was no blood and guts.
Yeah, it was, and there was a mystery, that, even though it is very foregrounded right at the beginning, that this old senator is going to be very important somewhere in the story, because it doesn't look like it at the beginning. You just ignore the fact that you've just been given this massive hint, and I love that. I love the fact that if you watch it a second time, you see so much more in the beginning part because you know what's coming.
That means that I've got to watch it a second time, doesn't it?
I think you'll get a lot.
Because that was my first time of viewing it.
Yeah,
I think you're right. Yeah, that was my first time of watching it. I'd never seen that one before.
It's things like when he's in the thing, and I do think it's the same apartment that they filmed Rosemary's Baby in, actually, because it is the Dakota building that they film in. But things like that rubber ball gets foregrounded there because he has the flashback where he sees his daughter throwing it to him to bounce it. And then it turns into the contemporary where the maid has knocked it out of the box and it bounces. And that's when he puts it into the desk. And then you forget about it. It's not there. It's nothing to do with anything until the woman from the society then opens up the desk and says, "Oh, look here, funny ball," puts it back again, just to remind the audience that happened. Then you throw it down the stairs. The mechanisms are just glorious when you take it apart and put it back together again as a piece of work. It's fantastic the way that it moves.
And the fact that it's had such an impact on so many ththings since then.
Yes.
Yeah. That ball bouncing down the stairs. I mean, they've done that in, I can't remember whether it was a Scream movie or the Scary movie, but you just sort of like see it again and again, and the whole idea of communicating with the dead, again, we sort of like see it more and more in films. Yeah,
and it was just. So that's why it's one of my favourite movies of all time. I think it influences the way that I look at ghost stories, because there's that and the film, the 1963 version of The Haunting, based on The Haunting of Hill House.
Right.
Those are those two ghost stories together. I can watch that as a double bill once a week quite easily, because they just tick so many wonderfully scary boxes for me, without being over the top and going. I like a good gore movie. I've always liked a good gore movie, because I was interested in the special effects. Apart from Hellraiser, which just thrilled me to absolute bits. I bloody loved Hellraiser when I saw it at the cinema when it first came out. Couldn't believe it, because again, it was one of those, never seen anything like that before, and it just blew my mind that you could be that much gore and make it kind of, and that violent in a beautiful way. It was just incredible for me. So these are films that really inform a lot of what I do, and I think a lot of the stuff I write, I actually think back to a lot of those mechanisms that are used in those films and try and recreate them in certain ways.
Ooh, then that gives me an idea.
Oh, okay.
Unless had you got anything planned for next week?
No, you know me. God's sake, planning.
Why don't we have a look at Hellraiser, the original?
Let's watch Hellraiser. In fact, actually, I'll tell you what we'll do as well. I'll tell you what we're going to do. We're going to set up the next 2 weeks. Right. We are going to watch Hellraiser this week.
Right.
And then for the following week, we are going to read Hellbound Heart, the short story it's based on from the Books of Blood.
Cool.
And I want to do it that way. I want to watch it and then read it, rather than read it then watch it.
I'm fairly sure I've read it, but it's been a while.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, good. We're sorted for the next fortnight.
Oh, this is good. Now this is moving more into kind of horror, because I think we look at the mechanisms of horror a lot more in this respect. Yeah. Which is again why I go back to the Changeling. So I'll go back to the Changeling and say, do watch it a second time, but watch it. Put your horror head on. Put your watching for the horror mechanisms in it. You know, the idea of here's a reality, here's an uncanny, and here's a weird, and watch it from that point of view. And I think you'll gain that kind of like admiration for it as a whole. It might not be your taste for a movie, but I think you'll actually get the admiration as a writer for what they did in that movie.
I'm going to go and have another look at it, definitely.
Yeah.
Just I'm going to make sure it's not on at the same time as Naked Attraction.
Yeah, well, that's always or Naked Distraction, as I think it should be called.
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you for that, mate.
Yeah, that was absolutely fantastic. I love doing that. And if you have any comments about what we've been talking about, and I'm pretty certain one called Danny will comment on this, because I know it's one of her favourite movies. Scare the bejesus out. But you know, when I first watched this movie, 83, I got it out of the video because I loved the poster, I loved the box. Didn't know anything about it. Nobody in my house wanted to watch it. So I stayed up. It was about 11 o'clock at night. Parents had gone to bed. Raymond was doing something else. I put the film on. I watched it. And because of the way they filmed it, I couldn't go upstairs to bed. So I slept on the couch because I couldn't look at the stairs. Now, I hadn't long lived in a house with stairs. I'd moved from a flat to a house with stairs in 1983. So I wasn't used to going upstairs to bed. But to stand at the bottom of stairs and look up them after watching that movie is a terrifying experience because of the way they film it. They keep using this wonderful parallel of the stairs, and especially when you got the wheelchair at the top, when she gets scared and she just looks up. The way they shoot it is just incredible.
Completely get that, and I think it's part of a formative experience because I had something similar when I was reading the Amityville Horror. It just came to one chapter and it had been really intense, the horror in it. And then you turn to the start of the next chapter and it says, the next day was even worse. And I just thought, I can't read any more of this at the minute. And I had to put the book down and then had nightmares and could only read it in daylight.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. I think we've got a bit of a theme going on here at the minute. We're going to be watching a few movies in between reading some of these stories that influenced them. So this is going to be...
There are worse ways to spend your life, yes.
Wonderful. Well, as always, my friend, my mentor, thank you so much for that.
Cheers, dude. Thank you ever so much. Loved it.
See you now. Bye-bye.